Well, thank you for joining us over the lunch hour for South and East Asia for our ongoing Lunch and Learn series. Lunch and Learn is an opportunity to hear one of our distinguished Fuller faculty members in their areas of expertise. We would love to engage our global Fuller community through this online experience and strategically promote engagement with thought leaders with broad appeals across different time zones. And this month, our speaker is Dr. Veli-Matti Kärkkäinen from Fuller Theological Seminary. And we're scheduling this at 10 p.m. Pacific time because our siblings in Asia often have to get online at a very undesirable time to participate. We would like to demonstrate our commitment to hospitality with colleagues in another part of the world and encourage us to experience a little of what they experience with the time. And my name is Ken Guan. I'm the Director of Student Engagement, and I would like to have one of our staff member, David Bannister, to introduce our speaker, Dr. Veli-Matti Kärkkäinen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We thank you for your patience with us this evening. We had some technical complications that are making it unable for us to provide interpretation in Korean and Spanish. However, we are grateful for your presence, and we would like to introduce to you Dr. Veli-Matti Kärkkäinen, a beloved professor in our Fuller community. The Reverend Dr. Veli-Matti Kärkkäinen is Professor of Systematic Theology at Fuller and Docent of Ecumenics at the University of Helsinki. Native of Finland, he has taught theology and lived with his family on 3 continents. He's an ordained minister in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America and serves as an associate pastor in the Finnish Lutheran Church in California and Texas. A prolific writer, he has authored and edited more than 30 books. His 5-volume series titled Constructive Christian Theology for the Pluralistic World develops Christian doctrine in dialogue with 4 faith traditions and sciences. Dr. Kärkkäinen's lecture today takes its title after his forthcoming book, published by Cascade Books, called I Believe, Help My Unbelief, Christian Beliefs for a Religiously Pluralistic and Secular World. Today, Dr. Kärkkäinen joins us not too far from Fuller's Pasadena campus. So we welcome you all to Lunch and Learn, and welcome Dr. Kärkkäinen.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those of us who are here in Los Angeles area. It's a great joy and privilege for me to give this short talk, and thereafter we will have a Q&A. And since English is not my first language, as you can hear, and there might be others, my siblings, so David will soon add a link to the chat, which the link gives you an access to my manuscript in case you wish to follow my reading of the paper, or of course you can also choose to just listen. So the title for my presentation is Christian Beliefs for a Religiously Pluralistic and Secular World. In this brief talk, I wish to introduce to you my most recent book to be released in just a few days in early May. Its subtitle, as we heard, is the topic, the title for the presentation, and the main title, and I will mention something about that later, is I Believe, Help My Unbelief. It is a new kind of book on what we Christians believe and how our beliefs are related to those of adherents of other religions. And it also talks about issues that oftentimes are not considered to be theological. For example, what do we Christians think about environmental care, social justice, and so forth? But before I talk more about the book, let me first provide a personal story, a narrative. After all, I'm also a pastor, and we pastors love to share some personal stories. So you can call it an autobiographical interaction. My own personal and professional narrative helps understand why I'm writing the kinds of books we are talking about and why I teach systematic theology, doctrinal theology at Fuller and elsewhere in a way that I do. And whenever I talk about my own life story behind my academic work, I often use the metaphor of 4 conversions. Yes, 4 conversions. That may sound odd, and somebody in the audience may say, what? Isn't it enough to have 1 conversion, like becoming a Christian? Of course. I'm using the term conversion here in a little bit different way. What I mean is that during the many decades that I have been teaching and also writing, doing research, and also doing pastoral work, I have encountered various kinds of opportunities and experiences and challenges, and they have helped shape, or to be more precise, reshape me to become and to be who I am as a theologian, pastor, and a world citizen. And while these 4 conversions that I'm soon introducing, while there is some chronological sequence, there's also a lot of overlap. It's not like 1 conversion happened, it stopped, and then the second one began. Rather, they are multi-layered. So I call the first conversion ecumenical. Ecumenical. Having been born and raised in Finland, in Northern Europe, I share the religious legacy of 2 Christian traditions, namely Lutheran and Pentecostal. Baptized and confirmed in the Lutheran Church, and then as a teenager, having found another spiritual home in Pentecostalism, mainly due to my pious mother, I for a long time have lived comfortably a double spiritual life. I fully own Lutheran tradition. After all, I'm an ordained Lutheran minister, but I'm also very, very comfortable, and I also own Pentecostal charismatic Christianity. And to add to my kind of ecumenical hybrid being, I've also learned much from Greek Orthodox Church, which may or may not be familiar to all of you, because in Finland, my native land, Greek Orthodox Church or Eastern Orthodox Church is one of the 2 so-called state or folk churches. This personal and family background helps explain why I chose ecumenics as my major in my doctoral work and also in my postdoctoral work at the University of Helsinki, namely ecumenics. It is one branch of theology. Ecumenics studies the relationship between various Christian traditions and how to best help Christians, even in the midst of doctrinal and spiritual differences, to live together and to seek for unity, which we have in Christ. And providentially, a part of my doctoral studies in the 1990s, I had an opportunity to study also with the Roman Catholics. I spent 1 full year with my then young family at St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota. It's a Benedictine university. And not only did I study with the Benedictines, But with my wife, I also had an opportunity to attend the morning prayers, the evening prayers, many services, and be a part of the great spiritual community. At the time, there were about 200 monks and about 100 some nuns in a nearby university and abbey. And my mentor, Father Killian MacDonald, had lived as a monk at the time for about 40 years. Now he's 106 years old and still alive. He writes poems. And incidentally, my wife and I will be this fall returning to Collegeville, Minnesota, when my next full sabbatical begins. Before beginning the doctoral studies, however, I had yet another very enriching spiritual and theological experience, namely, with my young family, we moved first from Finland to Pasadena. That's like over 30 years ago. I came to do one of my master's degrees in theology and mission at Fuller. And it was a very much also an ecumenical journey and also very much a global journey. Returning to Finland from Fuller in the early at the end of the 1980s, after 2 years of full-time pastoring, the church sent me to Thailand, to Bangkok, Thailand, to teach theology. And after I and my wife had acquired fluency in Thai, I started teaching theology in Bangkok in Thai with the same kind of broken accent that I have in English. But I'm very proud that I never taught in English in Bangkok. I always taught in Thai. And that was the launching of my second conversion. The first one was ecumenical and called this global or intercultural. I moved my family to live in a new culture in Thailand and learning new language, learning to love new kinds of food, different kind of environment and so forth. And even though we had already lived before on 2 different continents, Europe and the US, moving to Southeast Asia was a kind of very much mind and culture widening experience. And as soon as I started teaching Thai students who came from a totally different culture from mine, I also began to notice how limited and how one-sided my own view of theology and life was. Of course, I appreciated greatly my very high-level theological education, both in Europe and the US. But I also found that there was so much that I had to learn, not only about the culture, not only about the environment, but about how to think theology. I also did pastoral work, usually preaching at least twice during the weekend in Thai. So it took a lot of preparation, but not only linguistically. I had to learn a new way of thinking about, for example, preaching about faith. And so it was a very much learning experience. And as a longtime pastor, it hopefully has helped me. So, and at the same time, this continuing ecumenical conversion also was strengthened and deepened when I was on the mission field. I noticed how urgent it would be for all Christians, missionaries, and the local people to work for the unity of the church. It looked so strange to me that there were Christian ministers who came from different parts of the world, and all of them set up their own shop, their own little church, almost like you had some streets in Bangkok, which I called, church rows. They were like one little church after another, because they were all little churches, with the exception of a couple. And not only did Presbyterians, Lutherans, Baptists, and Pentecostals, not only did they not get along well. But most ironically, sometimes there were Baptists or Pentecostals or Lutherans who came from different parts of the world, and they, as Lutherans or Baptists, couldn't fully trust the other Baptist or Lutheran community. So it's very ironic because Christians are less than 1% in the country of over 60 million people, and they were not able to get along, let alone share the message of the unity in Christ with others. But now, this takes me to my third conversion, which I would call interreligious. We already had ecumenical, global, or intercultural, and now interreligious one, obviously, because after all, I myself, my missionary companions, and all Thai Christians, they lived in a highly multi-religious environment. Thailand is full of religion and religions. Of course, Theravada Buddhism is the main religion, and Thailand is the home of modern Theravada Buddhism. There's also significant Muslim minority, Sikhs, a big Indian from India, minority Chinese Buddhism, and so forth, which is on the Mahayana side. So it took a lot of work for me, and it took a lot of work for my missionary companions to begin to appreciate the importance of first learning, in this case, for example, the basics of Theravada Buddhism, spend time with people who were professional Buddhists, and like we did, we never lived in a missionary compound. We chose to live in just typical, kind of condos, or not even condos, kind of as standard apartments in Bangkok. So we were associating all the time with ordinary Thai people, and they were all Buddhists. So this journey which began, this interreligious conversion journey which began about 30 years ago, it still continues. I added to my menu of informal religious studies on top of Buddhism. I first added some basics of Judaism, some of which I already learned as a theology student, but also Islam, which is the religion that I currently deal with the most, and also some aspects of Hinduism for the obvious reasons. Living in Asia, it's good. And while it's a long journey, and I still consider myself as a student, it has helped me to write the kind of book we are talking about. So finally, after 3 conversions, when in 2000, or say before I came to Fuller after Thailand, for 7 years I worked as a college president in Finland, as a theological college president, and I continued also my informal religious studies. And then 2000, 24 years ago, when I joined Fuller, there was one more conversion waiting for me, and that was perhaps the most painful, even though perhaps also one of the more rewarding ones, and that I call interdisciplinary. Namely, first of all, I came to Fuller, which at the time had 3 different schools: School of Theology, where I was and I am, School of Intercultural Studies, or School of World Mission at the time, and then School of Psychology. We still have those 3 major areas of disciplines, but our structure is different. I had, for example, my philosopher colleague, Nancy Murphy, a distinguished professor emerita, who's still alive and also actively doing academic work on her own. She's a worldwide expert on all things philosophy and science. And then I had psychology colleagues, such as my current colleague Warren Brown, another world distinguished science expert, who's also a neuropsychologist. So those people and others, they pushed me at Fuller and said, in order to do good theology, you also have to learn to integrate sciences and religions. When you talk about the doctrine of creation or the doctrine of human person or so forth, you can't skip sciences. And I'm still in the learning curve because I'm by training humanist. I've only studied philosophy, behavioral sciences, and theology, but never studied sciences. So it's been a long journey. But all of these four conversions, and I can call them also interdenominational, intercultural, interreligious, and interdisciplinary, they have made me the kind of person that I am also as a theologian. And now, briefly, distinctive features of this book under consideration, namely, I believe, help my unbelief, with the subheading, which is the title for our presentation. So the idea for the book title, I believe, help my unbelief, of course, comes from the gospel story. A concerned father comes to Jesus for help for his sick child. And while the father obviously trusted in Jesus, the healer and the savior, the father also was very honest and transparent. He cried to Jesus, yes, I believe, help my unbelief. And that's the mode and the mood that I wish to communicate when I was writing that book. And in many ways, this book, as I said, which will be appearing in a few days in May, published by Cascade Books, in many ways, it is similar to the kinds of introductions to Christian doctrine that there are many on the market. Namely, I introduce the 10 most common basic Christian doctrines. What do we believe about revelation, triune God, Jesus, Holy Spirit, salvation, atonement, the Christ's work on the cross, the church, and the end times eschatology. But the way I do it is quite different from all other available titles, and it also is the way that I teach systematic theology at Fuller. So I want to briefly introduce some of the most distinctive features of the book, and now they make more sense to you because you have heard my personal narrative, and so I will give you briefly half a dozen distinctive features, and then we are ready for Q&A. So first, this book is not limited to any particular Christian denomination. It's ecumenical. I glean from Protestant, Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Pentecostal, Baptist, you name it, traditions, to make sure that the whole richness of Christ's church's wisdom can be learned and had by the readers. And we also have to remember that the world we live in has dramatically, or the world Christianity has dramatically changed in recent decades. Did you know that half of all Christians are Roman Catholics? 1/4 is Pentecostal charismatics. And the rest is Orthodox, Protestants, Anglicans, and so forth. So the most typical Christian is a Roman Catholic Christian rather than Protestant. And therefore, it's good for us to know about not only about our own denomination, but others. Second, the book's hallmark is the global extent and inclusivity. It engages teachings, testimonies, and insights from all over the globe and from theologians and teachers, male and female, from various global locations and from various agendas. The global orientation is mandated by the statistics alone. You might have heard that at the moment, more than 2/3, over 70% of all Christians can be found in the global South, Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the surrounding areas. And only 30% and soon less can be found in Europe and North America. And Africa currently has more Christians than any other single continent. And Asia is also growing steadily. So compare this with the beginning of the 20th century. 100 years ago, about 90% of all Christians were either Europeans or North Americans. So the things have changed very dramatically. And the profile of a typical world Christian has changed. A typical Christian in the world is non-Euro-American, non-white, female, younger, poorer, and often less educated, as opposed to what it was about 100 years ago, when it was an elderly, gray-haired European, rather well-educated and well-to-do, either male or female. So things have changed, and our way of teaching theology, our way of writing textbooks has also to be changed. Third, I know of no other theology book that also discusses the teachings of other living faith traditions. In this case, I engage with all Christian topics: Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. I give the basic orientation to the beliefs of those religions, and I make comparisons. So reading the book also gives you a crash course in 4 world religions and then ours. And I do it because it's so important to Christians to learn how to relate to believers of other faith traditions. And fourth, this book also engages not only the living faith traditions, but also sciences and the scientific worldview. So when you read parts of the book, which is about 400 pages, it also gives you a review of, for example, what current natural sciences are teaching about the origins of the world, what neurosciences are saying about how our mind works, what cosmology and quantum physics are saying about the end of the world, end of life, and so forth. And I embrace their insights from a theological and biblical perspectives. And then 2 more features, and then I'm done. This book also engages secular voices, namely the voices of those people who say that they are nuns, N-O-N-E, a person with no religious affiliation. Even though they comprise only about 10 to 20% of the world population, everywhere in the world, not only in Europe and North America, everywhere there's a growing number of seculars. There are a big number of secular Hindus. There's a big number of secular Muslims, secular Sikhs, and then secular people who are adherents of no religion. And it's very important for us also to engage their thoughts from the perspective of Christian faith. And finally, the distinctive feature of the book is that it is written in conversational style. It's not written as a dry textbook. I also know how to write such books, but this in a conversational style. It means that in principle, a person with no academic training in theology can fully read it and appreciate it, because whenever there are new concepts, and there are many in theology, as there is in medicine or in law, they are explained in a non-technical manner. And then a final note. While this book is conversational and semi-popular, it is based on a long-term, over decade-long, very technical and very detailed academic work. And when Ken introduced me, he mentioned my main publication, which is a 5-volume, about 3,000 pages long, 5-volume Christian doctrine by the title A Constructive Christian Theology for the Pluralistic World. And out of that, I have summarized about 700-page long textbook, which is used in all systematic theology courses. And now the book at hand, I believe, Help My Unbelief, is a further summary and kind of made an easier, made into a more accessible form. Okay, thank you for letting me give my own personal testimony. And now I'm willing to engage in conversation, and David will take the helm.
Dr. Kärkkäinen, thank you. Thank you very much for giving us this Lunch and Learn lecture, and for particularly the personal details that you shared. So often when we come to books, it can feel, academic books can feel like there's a large distance between us as the reader and the author, but this has been an invaluable time to connect more with the author of your coming book. We have a first question for you about the title of that coming book. I believe, Help My Unbelief. Would you speak a little more to why you chose that as your title?
Yes, some people think that you either believe very strongly all the time everything that the Christians believe, or you are a total doubter. You doubt or even deny faith. Life is not black and white. I have been Christian all of my life, but also an academic theologian and pastor. I have struggled, and I am struggling with many issues in my Christian faith because it's so dear to me. If faith would be something unimportant or marginal, I wouldn't be bothered by it. But just to give an example, the problem of suffering, particularly innocent suffering, and particularly innocent suffering of children and infants. I think I know basically all the philosophical and theological solutions. I have read many books I have written on the topic, but it continues bothering me. If there's a good God, and I believe there's a good God, if he created the world good as he did, how can it be that our suffering is not only not erased, but seems to be intensifying? Think of Gaza, think of Ukraine, or think of our poverty. So these are big problems. And I trust that my God is strong enough to hear my little questions. And I follow in the footsteps of Old Testament prophets like Jeremiah, Isaiah, or Job. They believed so fully and so wholeheartedly in their God that they went before him and said, God, I have a real problem. You ought to do something about this thing. They didn't defend in a negative sense God. Rather, they put him in test because they believed. So that's something that I also want to communicate. Yes, you can be confident about your faith, and I think I am to a large extent, but you also need to be a human person, fallible, limited, sinful, and therefore we struggle as much as we also walk the walk of faith.
Thank you for sharing. Well, this is our open time of questions. Feel free to speak your questions. We would love to see your face if you are able to turn on your camera and ask your question. If not, that's okay. You can still speak up and ask your question to Dr. Kärkkäinen. Feel free to share your question in the chat as well. Another question that we have for you, Dr. Kärkkäinen, is if you could speak to the interface of that cultural pluralism and religious pluralism, and sometimes the vocabulary used for the cultural and the religious, where are the boundary lines for that?
Right. Thank you, David. It's a great question. First of all, we have to remember, or let me put it other way. one of the first things you learn when you begin the study of religious studies is that the whole term religion is pretty much a post-Enlightenment Western concept, because it isolates religion and faith into its own silo or into its own domain. That's not the way most religions and most cultures work, because in many cultures, say Hinduism is a good example, or Judaism, there is no clear demarcation line between what we call religion and we call culture. To be an Indian from India, you are Hindu. Most to be a Jew is that you are born of a Jewish mother, even if you are an atheist. So I often use this Jewish example. It's quite interesting that you can be wholeheartedly Jewish, and you are, even if, like, particularly here in the US, where we have the biggest Jewish population in the world, majority are more or less atheists. So there's a very close connection between culture and religion. I'm using these terms because we do. And therefore, it is so important for us theologians and ministers to learn not only about, for example, what Thais, people of Thailand, believe in their Theravada Buddhism, because it cannot be separated from Thai culture at large. And also vice versa, when we study their culture, we have to remember that the connection between what I as a Westerner call culture and religion, it is a very elusive line. And of course, like terminology we use in religion and faith is, of course, it borrows from the culture and so forth. To give an example from Thailand, Thai in itself are quite complex language because it's also tonal. You have 5 different tones, which is a first obstacle for a person like myself who studied it and acquired fluency. But there are also at least 3 different levels of Thai. There's what we call the standard school level, and then there's the lower level everyday language, and then the highest royal language. Whenever you talk about royal family, you use totally different terminology. There are many Thais who never went to the school, who can't necessarily read much of the newspaper, even if they know how to read, if they have not studied the royal language. And so, but this royal language is also the language of the Bible in Thailand. So many Thais who are fully schooled, but not in the highest level, they have a hard time in understanding many of the stories and expressions in their own Bible, in their own native language Bible, because it's cast into a royal form. Why? Because if God is so big and highly venerated, you cannot use ordinary language. So you can see here the borderlines between culture, language, religion, faith, Holy Scripture, they're totally enmeshed with each other.
Thank you, thank you. We have a question in the chat from Kärkkäinen, and they ask, hi, Professor, what would you say is the biggest challenge for Christians living in a multiracial, multicultural, pluralistic society? The biggest challenge, and how do we overcome it?
I think there is not one key, but first of all, this is an excellent question. If I begin from the positive side. We have to remember that what we call nowadays multicultural or global, it's not a new phenomenon like it started 30 years ago or 50 years ago. In one sense it is, because never before have we had such communication and such knowledge about the diversity of cultures and diversity of religions. So in that sense, it's new. But if we think of Christianity, Christianity arose about 2 millennia ago in a highly multicultural Greco-Roman world. It was a Hebrew religion, our mother religion, and it came into contact with pagan, because from the Hebrew Jewish perspective, everybody who is a non-Jew is a pagan. The culture was highly multi-religious. There were mystery religions, kind of religious cults, all kinds of things. And there were also very rich philosophical life. So Christianity was born into a very multicultural, multi-religious world, and it did a lot of work. It took a lot of work for the emerging Christian church to even shape the terminology to talk to the pagans, to Greco-Roman intellectual and others. Therefore, we needed, for example, the creeds or some other many theological writings. So this is a reminder to us, and now I'm coming back to your wonderful question more directly, but it's a reminder to us that multiculturalism, pluralism, that kind of environment is not necessarily hostile to Christianity, but we have to reclaim it, because for many, many centuries, more than 1.5 millennia, Christians often lived in their own cultural and religious silos. To give an example, when Islam arose in the 6th century, after 620, most Christians in the world, even until Reformation in the 16th century, most Christians had never met one Muslim. Even persons like Martin Luther, my faith forefather, when he spoke about Muslims, he named them Turks, like a person from Turkey, because the only kind of Islam he knew of as a German Reformation then was they came from Ottoman Empire, and so they were in that sense related to Turkey. And now, when we live in a kind of world in which we acknowledge and are aware of diversity, plurality of religions, languages, cultures, we need to, in some sense, go back to our roots, our, as in Christian faith. And one is that we learn to build our own Christian identity, but in a way that is not necessarily exclusivistic of those who are non-Christians. You can be confident about your faith, and yet you can be welcoming and very hospitable to those who adhere to no faith or adhere to another faith. One of the ways that Christians in the past and nowadays, both in North America, in some European settings, in Africa, and also in a few places, I can think of in Asia, they try a mistaken strategy, and that is to try to build a Christian as a nation. Like when the Constantine, the emperor in the 4th century, gave Christianity a more elevated status in the society. They came to be from being a persecuted sect. They were given some government recognition. Many Christian leaders, they were of course very happy about that, and they aligned themselves with secular rulers and began to enforce Christianity with the power of sword and money and prestige. It has continued. The same happened during the medieval times in various locations, at the time of Reformation and so forth. And now we have new ways, expressions of that. Those are well-meaning, but are usually mistaken tactics. Because Christian identity also acknowledges the fact that we do not possess the world. There's no Christian nation. But there are Christians who can be light and salt, who have confidence in the gospel, and even if they struggle, they still are confident, but at the same time, they are open and hospitable towards others, and they learn about others. They're not only preaching and teaching others, but they also learn, for example, why is it that a growing number of Americans and Europeans are becoming secular? What is it about our faith and our church that makes them turn their back to faith, to biblical values, and so forth? And while we ourselves seek to live according to biblical teachings, we cannot expect that non-Christians or people with no faith can be forced to stick with our moral and religious principles. Those are some of the things that I think help us, and I'm also thinking of the historical lessons from early Christianity.
Thank you. I believe we have a question from Tara.
Yes, hi, I'm Tara, calling from India. And I was curious also about the title of your book, about belief, I believe, help my unbelief, and this question about what we do with faith, belief, and also unbelief or doubts and questions. And what do you find, I'm curious about in the different cultures and religions, this kind of pluralistic approach, how you find this issue dealt with about faith itself or doubts, and what room do you have? Even in our own, there could be a variety of ways people look at that.
Good. Thank you. Excellent observation. Excellent question. First of all, we have to, like what I said earlier, because life is not black and white. It is typical for a believer to have doubts, and for the doubter also to have some beliefs. What helps me in this issue is that the more I read the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, the more I see how common it was among the prophets, among the leaders, say Moses, David, others, and then all the prophets, and others, how common it was for them to be honest and open about their questions to God and their questioning of some of God's dealings. Sometimes we Christians, we mean well when we think that, for example, for us to be able to evangelize non-believers, we have to put forth a kind of very strong faith facade. We have to hide our own doubts. For example, if I talk to a Muslim or if I talk to a Sikh, it would be not a good evangelistic tactics to share about my own doubts. Biblical writers were very open, even sometimes even before the world, to the world meaning those who were not the people of Israel, to challenge God. But again, I'm saying they did it out of faith. The difference between an atheist and the believer is that the believer may sometimes be mad at God. For example, when you lose your beloved person, or something happens, but and the atheists, of course, are mad at many things. But when believer is mad at God, the believer is expressing his or her own trust in God. The fact that we are able to talk back to God is an indication that we take faith very seriously, and that is a matter of death and life.
Matter of death and life. Thank you for that reminder. I believe we have a question.
Yes, Julie.
Sorry.
Dr. Veli-Matti, hi. Thanks for your lecture, and look forward to the book with more detailed engagement. But my musing is, are you engaging with the radicalized aspects of religion, especially from the Muslim, Hinduistic, as well as even Buddhist? And there is a whole revival that is happening in the religious realm. Almost in every single religion, there is a radicalization, there is a fundamentalization that is happening. So in that kind of a context, like say, for example, what is happening in countries like India or Sri Lanka or many other places, where Christianity is almost pressed to a corner. So how are we engaging with pluralistic or faith practices in that kind of a situation?
Right. Another excellent question. Let me begin with a particular example. One of the interfaith processes that I am part of since 2013 is called Building Bridges Muslim Christian Seminary. Every year we gather together for a whole week, about 15-20 Muslim intellectuals, leaders, theologians, sometimes sheikhs or princes, and very influential and very knowledgeable Muslims. And then about 15-20 Christian leaders, bishops, archbishops, theologians, and others. And I may be the only evangelical. Many people expect that that kind of gathering year after year would take up issues of radical Islam or similar, but we are not taking it up for the simple reason that as big a problem the radicalization is, and it happens in all religions, including ours, it is a matter that has to be handled with insiders in that religion. I, as a Christian, have very little power and perhaps no right to teach Muslims how to deal with their own radicals, because well-meaning and good Muslims are very, very deeply concerned, and they are doing a lot of work with their own siblings. Or I'm not the one to talk to radical Buddhists as to how to behave in relation to Hindus or Christians. But the way we indirectly help it, that we build good relationship and build trust, for example, with Muslims, and at the same time, we are not shy about sharing about our own faith in a way that is also respectful, and at the same time, we give the Muslims in the dialogue the opportunity to share their own faith. So it's not hiding your Christian convictions. It is not about kind of putting on Sordino in a voice, but it also is the fact that it's often it's only the insiders who can fix their own movements or religious problems. And this also takes me to another question which I saw in the chat. paraphrasing, it said that there are still so many ecumenical problems, so many problems with different Christian denominations, and you can give numerous examples. I, as a Lutheran, do not have the right to tell Pentecostals or Catholics or Baptists how to behave ecumenically. But what I can do is that I behave in a way that manifests Christ's love. I do not speak ill of my Christian brothers and sisters. I try to build confidence. I believe in their good intentions. I pray for them. I count them as my brothers and sisters. And even if they speak ill of me, I turn my other face, my other cheek. Not that I'm always able to do it, but that's the posture, that's the attitude that I try to cultivate as an ecumenist, and it hopefully helps build a more build a reconciliation and mutuality.
Dr. Kärkkäinen, we have a question from Julie.
I want to make sure, is there any other question that needs to be addressed before from the chat? Is it okay if I go now? Okay,
Please
okay. Professor, can I ask how to pronounce your name? I want to say it correctly.
Veli-Matti Kärkkäinen.
Kärkkäinen, okay. Dr. Kärkkäinen.
Yes.
I really appreciated just your lecture today. Thank you so much. Just also the multi-layered conversion, and I can relate in many ways, having grown up Pentecostal and then having served in a Presbyterian church as a pastor, and now being in the PhD clinical psychology program here at Fuller, so the interdisciplinary approach as well. I had two questions. One was, you had mentioned that the interdisciplinary conversion was painful for you as a humanist. And so being someone in both disciplinaries as well, I was just curious as to if you could say more about that. I would like to understand better what you meant with that.
Yeah. Can I begin with this and then we take up the second one?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What I meant about it being painful is that having been schooled in humanistic disciplines and not knowing mathematics well, let alone cosmology, physics, the whole terminology, the way of thinking, the way of even writing. I'm not writing physics, but so everything is so strange that you are not only having to learn the substance of, for example, basics of quantum physics, unless you know something very little about, say, quantum physics 101, you cannot follow contemporary cosmology. So it's not only that I have to learn about what quantum physics may mean, but first, before I get there, I have to almost like change my way of thinking. What helps me a little bit, and you as a psychology student would appreciate it, and I briefly mentioned it, I have one of my master's degrees in behavioral sciences, in educational psychology. And of course, the way, even though I studied it about 40 years ago, I was taught how to do empirical study. So it gives a little bit of one step towards interdisciplinarity. but it's a constant struggle and constant challenge.
Wow. I really appreciate Dr. Kärkkäinen and how you just hold the ambivalence that we experience going through life with such humility, and I just really appreciate that. The second question, so sorry for the questions that are in the chat, was the kind of the dehumanizing way of how we can sometimes as Christians lack Christ-like hospitality, especially towards people of other religions, I think can be affected a lot by what we receive teaching-wise from the pulpits. So I just wanted to ask what are some directions towards change that we urgently and crucially need with regards to our teaching that can change, that? Yeah.
Right. This is a very, very crucial question, and it warms my heart as a theology teacher to hear it. The only recipe, the only cure is that we provide that kind of theological training to our ministers and to our Christian leaders, which also includes as mandatory aspect a basic orientation to at least one, if not more, world religions, gives some practice and guidelines about how to live in a multi-religious environment, how to meet a person with from other religion. To give you an example, about almost 20 years ago, I started a new course at Fuller, which is now taught by many, and it's in many programs, it is mandatory. It's called something about Christianity and world religion. I don't even remember the nomenclature. But the point is, it's a simple course. About 2/3 of the course is a basic introduction to Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. And then 1/3 is how to do comparative theology. And my point here, those mandatory assignments include, for example, reading brief excerpts from the Holy Quran, from Bhagavad Gita, or some from Tipitaka in Buddhism. Can you believe there are many Christian students who, for the first time in their lives, hold for example, Holy Quran in their hands? And even more, they also need to do the visits to, for example, the temples or to mosques. And for example, when they go to the mosque, they need to attend Friday prayer, which also nowadays includes a sermon, and then meet the imam or whoever is leading. And I have heard students many, many times asking me, and it's a very important and good question, like, can I do it? Can I go to, for example, Hindu temple? Can I be there? Is there something, contagious? Yeah. So those are very simple things, but they tell you how fundamental our task is. It's not only about academic knowledge, it's about attitudes, it's about preparing your spiritual instincts, it's about trust.
Yeah.
But can you imagine what would happen to the clergy and the Christian leaders if they would not only study the Bible, counseling, preaching, and so forth, which are very important, but they also would be mandated to get the basics of religions and what to do with them. That is a long-term only solution to the problem. It's very urgent everywhere in Christianity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kärkkäinen.
Thank you.
Dr. Kärkkäinen, thank you for your time this evening. Thank you all for your questions. I feel like that was a strong word for us to carry into our different neighborhoods, into our different spaces and places. We're grateful for your time, everyone. And for those we couldn't reach the questions to, we hope that you will bring those questions and more to future Lunch and Learns, just like this one. This is one in a longer ongoing series of Lunch and Learn events. Our next similar event will actually be on May 28th at 3 p.m. Pacific. It's called Last Lecture, and that specific event, historic to Fuller's tradition, that will be with Dr. Cameron Lee. And then the next classic Lunch and Learn will be with Dr. Alexia Salvatierra on June 20th at 9 a.m. Pacific time. We're grateful for all of you. Thank you for joining us during your lunch hour. And
Yeah, night.
Wish you. Thank you, Sharanya.
Yeah.
And thank you, everybody, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Good
Veli-Matti.
all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Good night.